how many of you have opinions about technology research? Okay, that's about half. So for those of you who raised your hands, this is meant to be a little bit provocative. You'll agree with some of these, you'll disagree with other of them. For those of you who didn't raise their hands, I hope to inject some opinions in your heads. Of course, my bias is that you agree with me that the things that I claim are myths and the realities are the realities. But the real thing is to start thinking about it and having an opinion. And if you disagree with me, great. We can talk about that either immediately after this talk, or I'll be doing a panel afterwards. So save those disagreements, bring them up soon. And now I'm going to launch into 8 myths about technology research of varying spiciness levels. Myth number 1, only basic science produces public goods. There's this perception that, stepping back, for those of you who aren't aware, there's a common framing where you say basic science is sort of discovering new laws of the universe, explaining gravity, et cetera, and there's applied science where you actually then take that and build technologies and other tools. And there's a perception that only this first step, only this real sort of like exploration piece is what produces public goods. And I vehemently disagree with that. Technology research produces public goods. And so an example that I love to give here is from Intel, where they spent about 10 years trying to create what are called copper interconnects on chips. So just, connections between the transistors made out of copper. I believe they were using aluminum previously. And they spent 10 years and over $1 billion developing this technology. And within a year or two, all of their competitors had also created copper interconnects. They had not been doing this R&D. And so there's a large component of technology research that, 1, produces public goods just by showing that something is possible. And then 2, there's many other pieces of technology research that's hard to capture the value of. So even the creation of technology often produces public goods. Myth number 2, public goods research is the job of the government. This is a widely held perspective among some groups, maybe less so here, but the thought of, well, governments are there to provision public goods, therefore, and the governments have these research ecosystems, therefore, governments should be providing these public goods. The reality is that there's a core tension with government research. And I'm not saying that government should not be in the research game, but at the end of the day, governments, especially in democratic societies, you kind of want to be responsible to the taxpayers. At the same time, in order to do great research, you need to be a little bit irresponsible. And that sets up a fundamental tension in many situations. Myth number 3, startups are good for research. There's a common perception that if you're going to be, you have a great technology idea, you need to go do the research. Where are you going to get the money? You go to a bunch of VCs and you raise the money. The VCs will often be happy to give you the money to do the work. But I know from personal experience that startups kill pre-commercial research. What happens over and over again is that someone comes in with a really ambitious technology that has a real shot of working, but it ends up taking longer and more money than they anticipated, and they get this intense pressure to specialize, get a product out the door, which ends up something much, much closer to what's already on the market. Myth number 4, researchers should be able to capture and can capture the value that they create. This is embedded in many ideas like, I am forgetting the name, but the retroactive funding. There's a lot of this is kind of one of the hypotheses of retroactive funding, that if we could just trace who's responsible for what and how valuable it is, we would be able to then sort of back propagate that value to the people who did that research. The reality is that it is impossible for researchers to get their just desserts. In the most extreme cases, we don't realize the value of research until long after a researcher is dead. But in many other situations, someone does an experiment that fails horribly, but that informs someone who goes on to do something wildly successful. How are you going to trace that? How are you going to trace the hallway conversations? It is just too hard. And so the thing that I want people to think about from this is, instead of thinking about retroactive funding, maybe think about paying it forward, of saying a lot of the wealth in society today comes from someone doing technology research in the past. So maybe the way to pay it forward is to make it so that people can do technology research so that someone in the future can become similarly wealthy. Another myth is that bottom-up coordination can solve all problems. That if you just put enough information out there and give people the tools to coordinate, they will come together to solve problems. And in some situations, that's the case. But in reality, research management matters. The fact, having a vision is what has driven so much impactful technology research, from JCR Licklider making the personal computer happen to Townsend with the laser. It is someone with a vision who comes in and, to the discomfort of some other researchers, says, I need you to work on this, I need you to work on this, I need you to work on this. This shouldn't be the permanent state of affairs for everything, but research management really matters. Myth number 6 is that papers hold the knowledge frontier. This is perhaps one of the more spicy takes, which is that you can feed all of the scientific literature in the world to an LLM, and it will not know how to do science, because there is so much fiddling and futzing and hacking that goes on in labs to get experiments to work that nobody ever writes down, that that doesn't show up in papers. So the reality is that technology is people. Technology, it lives in people's heads. This is why acqui-hires are a thing. And I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge this. Myth number 7 is that technology impact is measurable. We have this is sort of coupled to the retroactive funding, but just more generally, there's a sense of if only we could come up with the right metric, we would be able to measure which research organizations are good and which research organizations are bad. The reality is that Knightian uncertainty abounds. What do I mean by Knightian uncertainty? This is originally created by Frank Knight, an early 20th century economist, and effectively, it is a situation where you don't even know the axes on which you are measuring your risk. There are an infinite number of unknown variables. And so it is just, you have so little knowledge about how something will be impactful in the future that it is almost impossible to measure even 1,000 years in the future. How much impact did, say, treadmill cranes have? Can we measure that? It's been literally, so treadmill cranes are these things that they used to build castles, where you'd have a guy sort of walking in this wheel, and it's what drove the crane up. It was a great innovation, let us build amazing huge castles 1,000 years ago. But do we actually know how much impact that has? I don't think so. Yes, if you could simulate the world. So most of these myths rest on the assumption that you cannot simulate the world for all time. That is an assumption I'm making. Myth number 8 is that planning is worthless. In many domains that have very tight feedback loops, this may be the case, but in the world where we operate, where Speculative Technologies operates, of materials and manufacturing technology, where you actually need to go and implement things, coordinate teams, buy equipment that has large lead times, you do need planning. The reality is that most planning sucks. And so what people have sort of conflated these things, where they're like, oh, people have planned and it hasn't worked, therefore planning is worthless. The reality is that I think as a society, we've lost the ability to plan well. And it is a thing that we can regain. If you go on Google and you go to, well, I'm American, so if you go to the NSF If you just search the NSF website for the term roadmap, it will come up with thousands of results. And if you then go through those results and say, okay, which one of these have actually been implemented successfully? The answer is very close to zero. So there's a lot of planning going on, a lot of it sucks, and I think that it's possible to improve. And that's sort of the hook for the panel that will be coming up after this talk. So to go back through these, there's sort of 8 realities that I want to assert. The first is that technology research produces public goods. The second is that government research has some core tensions, and therefore private research is really is important. Startups kill pre-commercial research, and that's why we need organizations that are funded philanthropically to be doing research. It's impossible to make sure that researchers can capture the value that they create, and so we need other mechanisms for sort of funding research. I'm a big fan of thinking about paying it forward. Research management matters. We need to realize that, train people who have that unique skill set and work harder to understand what makes for good research management and how do we implement it. Technology is people. It's not just in papers. The people who are actually on the frontier creating the technologies are incredibly important, and you sort of can't separate them from the knowledge. And 8th, 90 and uncertainty abounds. It's extremely hard to predict the impact of a technology. And these are 8 core tenets that are sort of behind what we're doing at Speculative Technologies. We're a nonprofit research organization that is trying to push forward materials and manufacturing technology, sort of embracing all of these through our model, which depends on very opinionated program managers who do manage a number of different projects to sort of push a technology out into the world. And with that, I will wrap up, and thank you all for listening, and I believe I have 5 minutes for questions. Evan.
Hold on. I'm coming.
Definitely felt like you were just trying to trigger me multiple times in there, which was
great. Of course. I should have said trigger warning for Evan.
Yeah. I think I'd love to briefly diff your myth on planning with the Dwight Eisenhower quote of "plans are worthless, but planning is everything." I feel like that's kind of more it felt like that spans both your myth and the reality. And I wanted a 1-sentence take on that, but mostly I wanted to claim that I think that it's net harmful to say that you can't adequately reward researchers. And I agree that on the relevant timescales, the answer is correct, but within their lifetime, I think is a much more reasonable thing. And I think that if we don't try to reward researchers, that we're going to end up with really broken incentives. And so even though I would claim that it's not impossible, it's just really hard, especially get perfect, but we should still try. And I wanted to hear your take on, is that a reasonable claim? How firmly do you hold that one about research being hard to remunerate effectively?
Okay, I think that was 2 questions. The first, so to the planning question, I think that the process by which you update plans is part of planning. And one way in which we suck is that we make these lovely PDFs of roadmaps, and then we put them on the internet, and we're like, aha, job done. But in reality, the Eisenhower quote is absolutely right. And the trick is that what you somehow need to do is bake into your planning process of, okay, how do we update this? And that's not an optional thing. So, and then to the other question, Evan organized the conference, so I guess he's allowed 2 questions. I'm gonna double down in the sense that, I think that it is, the fact of the matter is that as soon, if you say oh, we can't measure this, if you can't measure it well, and we don't have good proxies, then it's just going to lead to a system that people are gaming. And so, I think that we definitely should be rewarding researchers for doing research, and we should be, have a system for acknowledging that people are doing better or worse research. But I think that, again, and the specific claim is capturing the value that they create, not rewarding good research or not. Okay, James, James has hands up.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to echo the kill pre-commercial research that happened at both the deep tech startups I started. We were just pressured by market incentives, desire to return capital, so on and so forth. So it sucks, and that's true, and I feel you. The second piece is I wanted to comment by what you mean by paying it forward rather than doing retroactive funding. Is not the paying it forward kind of the system that we currently have? So I'll give you my interpretation, and then I'd love to hear yours.
Sure.
Paying it forward is saying, hey, congratulations, you've had a really great exit, or you've gotten very wealthy off technology. I'm now working in a university, asking for you to donate to this new building or this new science initiative. So could you please donate to a nonprofit, and then hopefully we'll allocate that capital. Is that's what I think when you say pay it forward?
Yeah, to some extent, that is what I'm saying about pay it forward.
And in that system, at universities, usually universities take 60, 70%, something like that of the overhead. So very little actually translates into it getting paid forward.
Yeah, the who you are paying it forward to and how they use the money is a separate thing. I'm putting aside all of that. Although I have learned a lot more about how overhead is used in university, and while a lot of it is garbage, it is actually really, really expensive to maintain
For sure.
high quality labs. This is a thing I have learned recently.
Yeah. And so the final piece of that is, how are you thinking about paying it forward in creating a different nonprofit than a traditional academic lab or so on and so forth? What are you doing that is part of that pay it forward that other people aren't? If you can comment.
Sure. I mean, we are we have very low overhead. We are trying to sort of use money extremely efficiently and sort of not exist just to continue existing since the 12th century. So that's, and we are actually even considering having planned obsolescence to avoid that, but that's another story.
All right.
I think
One last question, if you want.
Thanks. It's another pay-forward question. So why does pay-forward is better than retroactive? Is it because you share the risk of the nation uncertainty that cannot be evaluated and create a better somewhat of a selling point for others to follow and to increase the probability of that particular innovation to succeed, as opposed to retroactively, any mechanism that is known with known rules may either be gained or is just at best a Keynesian beauty contest for essentially reputation at that moment in time, and it's just kind of a signaling game. I'm trying to think of reasons why.
Yes. Yes, what you said, in the sense that paying it because it is so uncertain what research is really going to be impactful until far, far in the future, and that's my contention, is that it's very hard, because it's so hard to measure what will be impactful and what even is impactful and what even has been impactful, then if you were doing this pay it back system, if you're trying to let people capture the value they create, it will create this huge skew towards people doing work that very legibly creates value, right? And so instead saying, okay, let's pay it forward, let's place a whole lot of bets on things that could potentially be impactful, I think is a better alternative. It's not ideal, it's not the perfect system, but there isn't a perfect system because of the 90 unknowns.